Welcome to The Next Interview, a podcast about careers, life, and achieving our greatest potential. And now, here's your host, Doland White.
So welcome to this episode of The Next Interview podcast, as the announcer just said, coming into the podcast. And I'm always honored with guests on the podcast, but today I'm particularly honored to have a mentor, a friend, just a really, really great man on the podcast today to talk about transformation and leadership and business and just some ideas. And so I'm welcome Anders. This is Anders Hansen, and tongue-tied heading into it, But welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, my friend. It's a big honor being here, and I do think the mentor role goes to you for all the great work you've done for me.
Well, we'll call it co-mentors.
I
So,
like that.
so for those who don't know you, what I would like to do is just take first couple of minutes and just have an opportunity for you to talk a little bit about your personal journey and kind of where you've been and where you are today, and a little bit about what you do, and then we'll kind of build on that conversation as we go a little further.
It's great. Yeah, so I help people overcome their self-limiting mental illusions so they can step out and create the quantum leap results that they desire in their life by leading better, richer, and more fulfilling existence. And we do that through our award-winning shows, Real Magic Live, which bridges a seminar and a show. And that is, we do it virtually, we do it live, Europe, we've done it here in the US, and we also have a series of online coaching programs and processes that helps people really rewire their mindset in their personal lives when it comes to health and wellness, but certainly also in business. And we've at this point helped over 10,000 paying clients.
That's amazing. I just find that amazing. I think there is so kind of when I describe you to people, when I refer people to you to come go take a look at your content and spend time with you in events and virtual events, I always kind of say, it's kind of like it's illusion magic. It's kind of what I kind of do is kind of like Cirque du Soleil meets Bob Proctor.
Yeah. That's it. Or if Tony Robbins and or Bob Proctor and David Copperfield would have a baby, that'd be me.
That paints a whole image, not only for me but for anybody that's listening to this podcast.
Right, we understand in images.
We do understand in images. Well, it's fun because one of the during our time, that's one of the things I kind of want to spend a little time today talking about is just illusions, right? Because we build our life and our successes around our own self-illusions, right? Who we believe we are. And we tell ourselves that story long enough that we actually buy it, right? We believe that.
Exactly.
And most of the folks in my audience, this podcast is, targeted towards leaders and business leaders. And I always spend a lot of time just kind of leaning in on the fact that what we do as leaders in any organization is we lead our lives, right? There's no such thing as work-life balance. There's only life balance. Right? And everything that we do impacts all of the domains, our relationships, our success, or the people we work with, the people we have custody of, and our families. So just, kind of one of the things that's always fascinated me about what you do is in your journey, kind of that transition from where you were and that shift into kind of your journey and your steps into personal transformation.
Yeah.
And how that occurred.
Yeah, for sure. So I spent 20 years in the entertainment industry, as you guys probably have guessed, performing with magic and illusions. And I reached a point after I left my native country of Denmark in 2006, rebuilt my career in the US.
Mm-hmm.
I went from performing magic for tips, reading a book called The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, and it helped me with my thinking. That was the first time I ever got into personal development.
Mm-hmm.
And I went from $20 a night being a good night to a year later being on a great cruise ship with a show in the multi-million-dollar scale, 13 to 15 dancers, 5 technicians. And I knew it wasn't an accident. I knew it wasn't some god sitting up there saying, now it's give Anders a shot. I knew it had something to do with my new way of thinking.
Yeah.
And people asked me, what did you do? And I said, well, I read this book, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind. But a lot of people had read that without getting any notable results. And so I started becoming more obsessed with what I actually had done. So I started studying quantum physics, personal development, spirituality, trying to figure out what the heck happened to me. And the more I studied that, the less magic meant to me. And I realized in hindsight, my soul was meant to spend 20 years in entertainment, learning to be on stage, learning to convey a message, learning to be in front of audiences. But it wasn't really the magic that made them go, how did he do the trick? It was more the thought of, what did I leave them with? Like, what did I actually leave them with beside a souvenir cup and a postcard? And that's how it felt like performing magic in the end. It was very hollow. It was a dream I had at one point.
Yeah.
And I just made a decision in 2016, leaving the cruise ship for the last time, that this was it. I knew I wanted to get into personal development and use magic as a vehicle for the message. And so I said, if I'm going to do this, I need to learn from someone. And he wasn't a mentor of mine, but like a very wise person in my life years ago. And he always said, Anders, if you're going to work with someone, make sure you work with the best. And so I started crafting an affirmation, I guess. I set a goal of working with the best in personal development in the world. And I was living in Vegas at the time. My partner and I, it wasn't very good. We were living in a 1-bedroom apartment. We were behind on rent. I had an eviction notice on the door. I had a blood test that said I was really sick. I was burned out with stress from entertainment, and I was buried in debt. So it was a terrible situation, really. Despite of that, I kept working with that affirmation. I'm working with the best in the world in personal development. And to make a long story short, New Year's Eve 2016, I went to Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas. I wanted to pick up my partner at that point, and so I went an hour early, parked the car, walked around, and ran right into Bob Proctor. We ran into each other on a busy casino floor. And I felt I had, like that just doesn't happen. Stuff like that just doesn't happen. But I had studied enough to know that it does happen if you stay focused in your mind. And so I had this voice going in the back of my head, you can't disturb him. On the other hand, Michael Jordan was also in there saying, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah.
So you gotta introduce yourself. And I did. And Bob was a master. I mean, he was, you knew Bob as well. And he was just a master at reading energy. So he asked me, what do you do? And I said, I was a magician. I was performing magic. Now I want to do what you do. And he went, magic, personal development. I've never heard it before. Do you got time for lunch tomorrow? I'm like, what? Let me look at my busy schedule, see if I think I can make that work. And so we actually ended up meeting January 2nd of 17. And that became the start of a great friendship. And he became a good friend of mine, a mentor of mine. And needless to say, he helped build my career in personal development, endorsed me really early on. We created a program together, which you were instrumental in actually helping to bring out into the world. And so that's the short version of the story.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, kind of a couple of things. Wrote a couple of things down. I think as you were talking about that, I think there's a difference between reading and action.
Oh, sure.
And I think there's a kind of the perception of if I read it, right, I should be able to just go figure it out and be able to go do it. And I think it's really important for people to understand that if you're going to grow, and it doesn't really matter what career you're in, kind of where you are, to go find the best to go work with.
Absolutely.
And it may take you a couple of cracks to go find that person that you gel with, or you have them in your mind, and you could be right or wrong, because a lot of times you don't know until you get there.
No.
But I think that's a really, really important point for leaders in particularly, is you don't do it alone.
No. That's one of my favorite quotes I heard Bob say years ago. You got to do it by yourself, but you can't do it alone. And
Yeah.
you need people. Everybody needs help. We all need mentors. We need a community. We need people around us. We need a cheering squad. We all do. We need accountability. And like you say, I call it the illusion of knowledge. People think that knowing stuff is enough, but if that was the case, then ChatGPT would have solved all the problems in the world, but it didn't. And so it's
True.
how do I take that information, assimilate it, make it part of my behavioral pattern, and then bring it out into the world. And when we coach people and work with clients, I mean, that's the biggest transformations happen when people adopt a new set of beliefs about who they are, what they're able to achieve, and when we close that gap between what they know and what they actually execute on, real magic happens. It sounds corny, but that's what we call it. It's like it's real
Yeah.
magic starts to happen in life when you start producing more of what you want, whether it be income or health or freedom or whatever it is.
Well, let's talk about that just a little bit, because I think one of the challenges that leaders face, and I think not just leaders, I think everybody faces, right?
Mhm.
And it can be, it's paraphrased with, the imposter syndrome is a kind of a generic term for it, right? And
Mhm.
it's that belief that we build into ourselves of, hey, um, David Meltzer calls it FOPO, fear of other people's opinions, right?
Yeah.
Rather than FOMO. I'm not worried about what I'm missing out on. I'm just worried about what people think of me.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
since we're quoting Bob, I always love Bob's quote around what other people think of you is none of your business.
100%.
I always love that.
Absolutely.
But I think one of the things that would be good to kind of just talk about just a little bit and kind of hear your insights on is, so when you're, everybody,
Mhm.
has that little bit of
Sure.
nag at the back of the neck on,
Yep.
I may not be who I think I am. So how
Yep.
do you what things can people do to, kind of change that thinking to, to be
Sure.
more?
100%. Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a big problem for a lot of people. And I learned it the hard way. I mean, I spent 20 years on stage, always wondering what people thought of me.
Hmm.
And it actually went way back to my childhood. I had a paradigm from my mother who always, I heard her say, I wonder what the neighbor thinks. Anders, I wonder what the neighbor thinks. And so that was so lodged into every cell of my being that when I immigrated to the
Interesting.
US, I walked down the street to my apartment one day and this thought occurred to me, I wonder what the neighbor thinks about me here. And I'm like, wait a minute, why do I think that? And
Hmm.
then I started thinking back. I heard it all my childhood. I wonder what the neighbor thinks. But it controlled me to a large extent. Every time I went on stage, I would be sick sometimes. Sometimes I would go out and puke in a bucket backstage. I would go back on stage and do what I had to do. And I thought, well, eventually it'd have to subside. It has to subside eventually, but it never did. It actually became stronger and stronger and stronger. And then in 2017, Bob and I started, talking more, and he actually invited me to speak at his event, Paradigm Shift in LA,
Mhm.
with my new concept with real magic, and invited me to perform magic while sharing these insights what I had studied, but I'd never done it before.
Yeah.
It was the first time I ever done it. He didn't know that, but I knew it. And so I had to prepare. So I prepared and rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed, but the nervousness is just still the same. And I
Yeah.
remember backstage, he came up to me right before I was about to go on, and I was like pale, I was shivering, shaking, I was so nervous. And he goes, "You're nervous, aren't you?" I go, slightly. And he slams his hand in the table. He's like, "How dare you be nervous?" And he raised his voice and he was like, "How dare you be nervous?" I mean, you know when you tell your dog something and it doesn't understand you, it'll go like that. That
Yeah.
was like me. I was like,
Yeah. Like,
"What?
what?
Do I have an option? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
can I just decide not to care?"
Yeah.
He's like, "That is so selfish. You're worried about what they think of you. Your energy is inverted. It's going inward. How selfish is that when they sit out there and they actually have the need for what you have to offer? So you just forget about yourself for a minute and focus on the recipient."
Right.
And he smiled and he sent me on stage and goes, "Just have fun with it." And I'll never forget it. The nervousness just went away. Like it just faded in the background because I changed I changed the direction in which that energy flowed.
Yeah.
So now I just focused on the recipient. I just talked to one person. There was 500 people in the audience, 120 countries live streaming, but I just talked to one person, and it felt good actually taking it, you know, changing the energy, focusing on leaving them with a feeling of increase. You cannot think about yourself and wonder what they think about you when you're also preoccupied by making them feel better about themselves. And so today, I don't care what people think of me. That is truly their business, like Bob says. But I'm very preoccupied with what people think about themselves. And when I fill that vacuum with how I can make them feel better, there's no time left or space left to worry and wonder what they think. And like Bob always said too, he figured out what they were thinking. They weren't.
Yeah.
Just pretty obvious when we look at most people's results. They don't think anyways. So why do we think about what they think?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I think a lot of times, when people they're so focused they're focused this way,
Yeah,
that
they're inverted.
they lose track of that ultimate purpose, right?
Yeah.
And whether it's, again, going back, whether it's business or family or relationships or people we love or kids, when you lose track of the purpose, and then losing track of the purpose, you
Yeah.
can't succeed.
No,
It's
it's impossible.
it's impossible, because you can't do that.
No.
One of the things that I talk about quite a bit is the word trust.
Mhm.
And there's a bunch of domains of trust, and this isn't about me, this is about you today. So I want to make sure, when you're, leaders here in a lot of businesses, they'll hear, I had a conversation this week, and the gentleman I was speaking with, we were talking about woo woo.
Mhm.
When you talk about transformation, and reading Science of Getting Rich, or reading Think and Grow Rich, or reading other Napoleon Hill concepts, or there's
Mhm.
all kind Waddles, or all kinds of different authors in this, in this space.
Mhm.
And there is kind of that link between transformation, and I'm just going to say my affirmation and money's going to fall from the sky. It's just going to happen that way. And there's other steps that have to actually occur to get that to go on.
Mhm.
So from a leader's perspective, how would you frame to a leader around investing in that, um, I won't call it skills, but maybe it is skills, but the spiritual skills of truly
Mhm.
understanding how you work, how it connects, and then how that converts to action, and kind of where you go from there, because that really is what transformation's about, I think.
Yeah, and absolutely. But that starts with becoming aware of who we are. If we don't know who we are, how are we ever going to change? And most
Mhm.
people think they are their body or their name,
Mhm.
and they live in a purely physical world, corresponding with the physical world around them through their senses. But when we start understanding who we really are as a spiritual being living in a physical body, who's gifted with an intellect and a mind that can think, and we learn to use the mind as a tool so that it's not the mind that's using us, that is the first big step, and I believe the prerequisite for any kind of transformation. We have to understand ourselves, and we are spiritual beings. So if the program, whatever we are taking part in, doesn't have a spiritual foundation, it's just not complete, because you're still treating a symptom.
Mhm.
And so it's just, in the world we're living in now, the more high tech the world becomes, I believe the more important it is to have focus on high touch awareness, mindset, emotional intelligence. That's the equity of the future. And the leaders that don't embrace that still live in a physical world where it's all about telling people what to do and make the wheels go, they're lost. I mean, they're left behind. It's just, that's just the
Mhm.
way it is. And yeah, so transformation starts with awareness about who and what we are. And once you understand that the mind functions on two levels, conscious, subconscious, and that we have a body we live in right now, we can start taking a look at how those two different parts of the mind works, how you construct new ideas, accept new ideas, implement them, so that the body starts producing other results. But you see leaders and teams all the time making agreements about what we're going to be doing. Now you see that happen now. 2025 is around the corner. We have a
Mhm.
new vision for 2025. And for most, it's just words on a piece of paper. There's absolutely there, it's not been internalized, or it's a construct in a spreadsheet. But when you have a team that are emotionally bought into the vision and the idea, there's a bigger likelihood that their behavior will shift. But I think a lot of people experience that symptom where you talk with a team member or, people around you, and you agree to what needs to be done. And people say, well, I'm committing to this. I am going to get it done.
Yeah.
It will be done. And then it doesn't get done. And you ask them, why didn't you do it? Well, and they point to some reasons. They're never the real reason. The real reason is they weren't programmed to execute on it. Their self-image was most likely not in harmony with it.
Right.
But when we start changing on an idea level intellectually, then we change our emotional state, our self-image, and all the paradigms in our subjective mind, and then the behavior follows, and the results starts to happen more naturally than before. Before, it could have been this forced, contrived way of making results happen. Now you let results happen with and through you. There's a big difference. There's a massive difference.
Yeah, I think it's very important. So how do you? I happen to agree. I think that where we are now, in particularly culturally and as leaders, there are a lot of pressures that occur, downward from above. If you're a leader leading a team who has a CEO or a founder or other folks, but there's pressures that occur down, pressures that occur up from the people that you're working with, and there's a great degree where you have to be vulnerable and you have to be authentic and you have to do that. And you have to know you first before you can actually take those steps to go work with your team. But if you're in that kind of role where, you have custody of these outcomes, right? Whatever the outcome happens to be that, you've been asked to go accomplish with a group of people who may not all be aligned.
Right.
And, you mentioned, emotional intelligence. And
Mhm.
so how do you define emotional intelligence? So what is emotional intelligence?
That's a good question. It's being aware of your emotional state from minute to minute so that you can self-regulate. That's how I believe we're supposed to work with it. Leaders that aren't self-regulated, that aren't able to emotionally regulate themselves first, will
Mhm.
never be able to lead anybody else. People that stand and fall with circumstances and who let results control them emotionally, they're toast. Um, Emotional intelligence is also intuition. It's knowing what's going on with your team because you feel it. It's being so present in a conversation with a team member that you feel their energy. You can
Yeah.
start sensing if they're okay, and if they're not, there's you just pick it up, and then you can invite them into a one-on-one conversation and talk about what's going on. But emotional intelligence is it's a big topic, and it has so far reaching, I feel like tentacles almost in different arenas, but when it comes
Mhm.
to leadership, I feel it's absolutely a prerequisite. And the whole for a lot of people, and the ones we work with as well, is being able to disassociate emotionally from what's going on, and your state is the first step, but it's also the biggest step. Because as a leader, when you can prime yourself emotionally to just feel really great regardless, like W. Clement Stone had this concept that he just called "that's good,"
Mm.
and Earl Nightingale actually created an entire program around it and expanded on it. Regardless of what happened, he just said that's good, and he started looking for the good in it. He didn't let it control him.
Right.
He remained in control of his emotional state, and thereby the results. But when you look at, and we saw it in 2020, I mean, fear was served on a silver platter for the whole world to see.
Mhm.
And you stepped in, you helped us as a great leader with leadership, amazing leadership skills, and helped us through that period where we're not letting results control us. We control the results. And we
Mhm.
actually came out of that year with just as great results as the previous, where there were other companies in this business that just belly flopped because, what if now
Sure.
we lose control of ourselves? So, yeah, I would say emotional intelligence is just the ability to emotionally self-regulate and use your intuition to guide you in decision making and in handling your team.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to that, as we kind of unpack some of that. I think, every leader, it's a and being self-regulating is a challenge for leaders because there
Mhm.
are pressures and exertions on you on a daily basis. And I love the W. Clement Stone that's good thinking, because there's a lesson in there. There is something in there that will help you progress. And
Yeah.
I've always tried to remind my teams that, when those kinds of things happen, it's okay. You can't crash this thing into the rocks. It's going to take a lot more than that to sink us. So don't worry. Don't worry about crashing us into the rocks. We're
That's
okay.
right.
We've got a good course.
That's right.
And I think a lot of leaders kind of get hung up on that. One of the things that I see leaders have a challenge with that from an emotional intelligence perspective is to do it. I don't know if this is a word, but inauthentically.
Oh God, yeah. Oh yeah. hmm That's the worst. It there's a cause and effect relationship, because if you're not authentic, uh, people feel it. And I remember telling Bob Proctor back then. He asked me, "What do you want?" And I said, "I want to lead, this and people in the world, and helping to create and facilitate this shift in their lives." And he goes, "Wouldn't it be a smart move on your part if you start with yourself?" And I'm like, yeah. And a lot of leaders start with everybody but themselves.
Yeah.
We had one in our programs, an amazing person, and he was very open about this. He said he was leading a big team, big multinational, and he would, in boardrooms, meetings, talk about the importance of meditation and working on your mindset. And in the break, he would go to the bathroom and have a panic attack, and he would go back and preach about balance and mindset. And
Mm.
so, and that happens a lot. Leaders trying to be what they're not, and it just doesn't work. And so, it's being in integrity with yourself. I think is just so important. Only lead with awareness and not just knowledge and dashing out orders. It has to be awareness. And the difference, knowledge is something you gather from the outside, and awareness is a change in state that you're building from within. It's taking the knowledge, integrating the knowledge, learning from that integration, and then you're building awareness. And when you lead with awareness, you lead authentically, because a leader would never ask one of their followers or team members to do something they wouldn't necessarily be aware of how to do, or be willing to integrate themselves. And I find that has been crucial for me.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating, because I do think, I've had the pleasure of being in my career of working for unauthentic, whatever happens to be I'll have to look it up when we're done with the podcast, with what the proper word is. And your English is far better than mine. So, but when you're in a position, like it, let's go back to the cornerstone of leadership. In my mind, always the cornerstone of leadership is trust. Right.
Mm.
And there's 4 domains of trust. And we're talking about the very first domain, which is you have to trust you first.
Yeah.
So before you can earn the trust of others. And I believe firmly that if you're not authentic, if you really aren't aware and you haven't developed that awareness, then your own self-trust, you haven't taken the time to develop self-trust, to understand your gaps and limitations, and your willingness to be vulnerable and say, "Hey, I don't know, but let's go figure it out, or teach me."
Mhm.
And I think when you're working with your teams and leading teams in that spot, they can smell it on you. There's an aroma that comes from that,
Yeah.
and then in what you and I would call a vibrational state.
100%. Absolutely. And yeah, and like I often use Bob as a reference point, because I've had 5 amazing mentors, and yourself included. But Bob always, he was the one that had probably the biggest impact on my mindset, certainly.
Hmm.
And he said, you need to know when to lead and when to follow. And he said, a great leader can't become a great leader until they're willing to be a great follower.
Hmm.
And then in certain situations you lead, and in certain situations you follow. Like with my team and my new marketing director, he's amazing. He's wonderful. And before he came on board, I would lead in some of those arenas, but now I follow, because he bring incredible awareness to the table with stuff that he has actually done, not just talked about, not just read about, but actually done. And the same with our operations director, Olivia, superstar at what she does. I
Yeah.
follow her. I follow her lead in those arenas. But when it comes to the overarching vision of the company, it's my responsibility to lead that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I think there's Blaine Bartlett, right? That one of the Blaineisms that Blaine and I talk about is, co-creating coordinated movement. is his, is his sentence. And I believe that that's very important. And one of the things that I think leaders get lost in is when they're in the role of setting strategy or setting a company vision or helping to do that, right? And then collaborating with the team on that, right?
Yeah.
Through that process. So it's not a non-benevolent dictatorship, right?
No.
It becomes a collaborative method, and you take the counsel from the people you're working with, and then you call the ball. But is that willingness to step aside and trust the team, which then really truly becomes that definition of empowerment. You're empowered to go do this and teach me, show me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we know what the outcomes are, but you let people autonomously reach that outcome with their own creativity. And
Yeah.
yeah, I love
Yeah.
it.
And you allow them to live in their zone of genius. And we all don't share the same zone of genius.
No,
I
thank
think
goodness.
the power, thank goodness. Which is why, we learn many, many, many things across all the years. So leaders are, I believe there's a hinge, right? Small hinges, move big doors, right? There's a hinge from a leadership perspective
Yeah.
that um, helps the leader understand that, hey, maybe I need to step back and think about, transformation, or think about learning more about who I am, and think about developing self-awareness so I can get to emotional intelligence and authenticity and vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
What one or, and not everybody's in that state, and you can't cross that state until it's the time,
Right.
right? Because you don't develop skills for it, you develop desire. So what are one or two things would you say, if you're a leader and you aren't doing these things,
Mm-hmm.
here
Yeah.
are two or three things you should think about doing. Here are the steps to begin
Yeah.
the process.
Yeah.
Baby steps.
Absolutely. So the first thing I would say is practice gratitude every day. I'm on day 2168 in a row, and it grounds me and it creates centeredness in my mind, and it anchors me. And Wallace wrote about that in The Science of Getting Rich. He said the whole process of mental adjustment and atonement can be summed up in one word, and that's gratitude.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important. It seems so simple, and it almost seems silly for a lot of people. They don't think they have time for it. There's other more important tasks at hand. But if somebody were to just sit down for 20 minutes, half an hour, and write out in hand, and it's important you write it out in hand, because writing in your hand triggers mental images, and they in turn creates emotions, and that alters your emotional state. And it really creates that Teflon coating between your state and the world out there. It creates a bigger gap between what happens in your state. And so if we just prime ourselves with gratitude, ask for guidance in that heightened state when you can future pace the gratitude. Be grateful for what is, but also be grateful for what is on its way.
Mm-hmm.
That has to do with the goal. Now we anchor in a totally new frequency in the body. That's a wonderful place to live. And from that frequency comes insights, ideas that will help us reach our objectives. So write out gratitude, ask for guidance. Now that I'm in my goal, how easily and effortlessly did I get here? Most people say, well, how can I? That also implies I haven't done it yet. But if you
Yeah.
ask yourself, how did I do it? I'm so grateful now that I'm here. How did I get here so easily and effortlessly? And you just remain open.
Right.
The answer will come. It must. That's the law of polarity. You couldn't have one without the other.
Right.
And so I think those two steps, and then setting yourself free at the end, asking for forgiveness, sending forgiveness out to people that have crossed your path, done things they shouldn't have done. I've had to work on that multiple rounds. I had to forgive myself for abusing myself in the entertainment industry, for crashing with stress and overwhelm. I had to forgive past team members. I had a lot of stuff I had to forgive.
Yeah.
But it sets you free every single time to a new. It has nothing to do with them. It's everything to do with yourself. And I've seen the biggest transformations happen as a result of that. So that's simple, that's easy to execute on, and it will help regulate your emotional state.
Yeah. I think that's very important. It's just had conversations yesterday specifically around in a coaching call around gratitude and the state that gratitude puts you in, because it changes your physiology, changes your spirit, changes your mind, and connects the mind, heart,
Mhm.
and I always point to my stomach for intuition, but it's probably, not where intuition lives, but I point to my stomach. It tells me I'm intuitive, and it craves Big Macs every now and then. So I go with that as my intuition. So
Sounds
yeah,
good.
but I do think that that's important. And the other, because we do lose track, like one of the things that I think is important for leaders is, and gratitude sets that state for us, is celebrate.
Yeah.
Gratitude gives us that moment of time. It's a form of celebration. I am grateful for,
Yeah. It is.
and celebrating both the past, today, and tomorrow
Mhm.
puts us in a mind frame where we celebrate your failures. I'm so happy and
Yeah.
grateful that yesterday I screwed this deal up
Yeah.
and didn't
Oh
do
yeah.
good, didn't do good, and I won't do that again. I'm happy and grateful I learned this lesson.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Oh, absolutely. You can be so grateful for the biggest F ups, that you make because there's a big lesson in it. And the bigger the mistake, the bigger the lesson. And
yeah,
so, yeah, I think that's really key as well. And there's no mistakes. There's just learning lessons along the way. And again, when you treat failure and success the same way and you just emotionally regulate along the way, you've achieved something really big, I
yeah,
think.
yeah. It's very true. And thank you for saying F up, because then I don't have to change this to an explicit rating if we said the actual words. So
Right,
we can,
right.
we can
We
leave it.
learned that lesson a
We
while
can
back.
leave it PG-13 for now. So no, but I think that's really important, and the I do believe that from a if in particularly as a leader of any business, of any company, regardless of where you are in the organization,
Mhm.
um, the it's critically important that you focus on self-transformation. And
Mhm.
self-transformation is a growing, it's not, and don't expect to do it tomorrow.
Right.
Work towards that, but know that you're on a path
Yeah.
and that you will be imperfect. And chances are you will be driving down the road one day and somebody will cut you off and you will flip them off and you'll feel bad about it. But you'll learn from those kinds of episodes. So
That's it.
not that I have ever done that. So
Mhm.
anyway, at least not recently. So,
Right.
so, so I think that, I think that there's some really, really great lessons in here for leaders that listen to the podcast, and in particularly listen to this episode around self-awareness, emotional intelligence, gratitude, having a state of gratitude, understanding your goals, being vulnerable with your team, that
Mhm.
as that person who is setting the vision, setting the state, whether it's a department, a business, wherever that is, that it's okay to leverage everybody's superpowers. You don't have to be the person knowing it all,
Right.
or doing it all, which is even a bigger challenge, I think, for people.
Absolutely.
So we're coming down to the mark in the call where I kind of go, okay, let's wind this up here. So one of the things that I think that's important, and this will be in the show notes, um, is I encourage people listening to today's podcast to go explore, go look at the programs, go sign up, go participate, begin that journey,
Yeah.
and do it. There are people in the world who claim to teach it and then don't do it.
Mm.
And then there are people in the world who teach it, live it, do it, create it, and thrive.
Mm.
And I consider you as one of those individuals. So
Thank you, my friend.
my pleasure and an honor. So where would you say, hey, look, if you just want to know where to start,
Yeah.
where should people, what should people do? Where do they go?
Yeah. So after having worked with 10,000 people and a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs and people just pursuing greater results in their personal lives, I've learned that there's 5 major mind illusions or success blockers
Hmm.
that are preventing us from achieving what we want. And it kept coming up in dialogue with clients. So I decided to put together a quiz that you can take completely free that will reveal to you your mind's biggest success blocker and what to do with it. And it's
Interesting.
on my website, andershansen.com/quiz, QUIZ, zebra.
Great.
Yep.
Cool. It will be in the show notes for those who actually ever bother to read the show notes, but it will be in there, and it'll also pop up on the As you can probably see on the screen right now, the link is on your screen, not on your screen today, but when I edit, and I'll drop the link in, so you'll be able to see that link. So thank you for taking time today and just coming and hanging out with me. I know you got a lot going on, and you're heading off on a journey with your brother, and things are happening. And I'm grateful to get this bit of time with you and share this wisdom with folks that are listening to the podcast.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation. I truly appreciate it. It's a big honor.
It's my pleasure. So for those listening to the podcast, as we close the podcast, a couple of things. The very first thing is please do read the show notes. Please take a look at it, because it does include actionable steps. It includes a lot of meat out of the podcast itself. And if you like the podcast, give it a like or follow. Please do. But that's not as important as the next thing. And the next thing I'm going to ask you is, if you know a leader who is in the role of running an organization, managing a team, setting goals, trying to figure out their path, and they are stressed, they have anxiety, they have imposter syndrome, and they've shared those things with you, share this podcast with them. The intention for the podcast is to help leaders be better leaders, because as a leader, we're in custody of lives, and our role with that custody is to make other people's lives better. So share this podcast with them, help them be better leaders. Together we can do all that. We all get to go change the world and have an impact. And on that note, thank you very much, Anders. Thanks everybody for watching the podcast. I'm Dolan. I'm the host. I'm the empowerment guy on LinkedIn. We'll see you on the next episode.
You've been listening to The Next Interview. For more information about today's guest, be sure to visit the show notes. If you enjoyed the show, give us a follow and be sure to join us here on The Next Interview.